Okay, let's officially call this meeting to order. How are we on quorum?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I believe the quorum for this committee is 5, and I do count in the room 3 jurisdictions, or 3.5 if you count Jeff, but online then we have the remaining. So you have come to the designated time and place, and you have reached quorum.
Thank you. Let's look over the looking to make or to approve the agenda. I did get a comment about making a change to the agenda, and can I speak on your behalf, Brandon? The comment was to move item 6D from an action item to under category 7 for an informational item. Okay, so then with that amended, can we get a motion to approve the amended agenda?
Gail Sturdivant, I move to approve the agenda as proposed.
Second, Brandy Williams.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any other discussion on that? All those in favor of approving the amended agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, agenda is approved unanimously, or the modified agenda is. Thank you, Brandy, for catching that. Okay, any public comments on any items not on the agenda? Anyone on the phone? Just to give yourselves a chance. Okay, I hope everyone's had a chance to review the meeting minutes from our April 21st meeting. So are there any comments on those meeting minutes? If not, if I can ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I'll second. This is Brian.
And that motion was by Brandy. All right, all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, meeting minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Okay, John, Board of Directors report.
This
please.
is, Joel, this is Wendy.
Wendy.
I don't get to vote because I wasn't there.
This is America. You still get to vote, but it's fine.
Well, I wasn't there to be able to say yes, no, or indifferent. So that's
Do
one
you
of the
have a-
first times.
Do you have a comment on the meeting minutes
No,
then?
I don't have anything. No. Mm-mm.
Okay. Okay, John.
All right, the item 5, the Board of Directors report, Mr. Chair, members of the TAC. I think the only item of note for you all here in transportation was at the last board meeting, we went through Cdot's proposed action on State Highway 115 and how they can move forward with the project as bid. Well, I think they might have to make some minor adjustments, but basically they came up with a funding plan to move some stuff around to come up with the 8 million. I think about 900,000. I don't have the stuff in front of me, but 900,000 came from TPR number 1, Pikes Peak TPR, and the remainder of the 7-point-something million came from TPR 14 Central Front Range. So the board talked about that and they said, yeah, this is great. We appreciate Cdot moving forward so that we can keep that project on track. The outcome of the board was they passed a motion of support, and they did understand at that time that was going to go to the Transportation Commission today. And then if that passed, you guys would look at a tip amendment today. And then they would meet in a special session on Monday with the CAC being referred to via email so that we can move the project along. And so CDOT can accept the bids before that they expire after the 30 days. So as a side note, Mr. Chair, kind of stealing the thunder of the when we get to the tip amendment, Transportation Commission did approve the action today. So you will have a tip amendment for 115, provided you approve it. Then we will poll the CAC committee by email. And then the board will meet on Monday to do a Zoomophonic board meeting. I think it was at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock at 8:30, and it should be over by 8:40. So should be a real quick thing, and it's the only item on the agenda. So that concludes a report on what happened at the Board of Directors, plus a little spoiler alert of what's going to happen for the tip item.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Danelle, yeah, that was teed up perfectly for you.
Yes, absolutely. I have to talk less, which is great for me. As John said, we brought this to the board as an information item. And it was moved forward by the Transportation Commission. So today in front of you, we have a tip amendment to reduce funding in line with the Cdot funding plan from 3 projects. We're taking some funding from the US 24 at 31st Street Intersection Improvements Project, the State Highway 21 Corridor Project, and the I-25 Fillmore to Garden of the Gods project to help make up that shortfall for the State Highway 115 project.
Was going to ask the chair if he was looking for a recommendation or a
Yep.
motion.
Yep. Any questions, or is there a
Shane is on online if anybody has any questions.
Shane, what's the capital of equity? No, I'm just kidding. Questions related to the item?
Yes, please.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, we're looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, Gail Stoddard, City of Colorado Springs, I move that we approve the tip amendment for State Highway 115 as presented in staff's memorandum.
Thank you, Gail. Do we have a second?
Second.
By Brandy. Okay, any other discussion on that tip amendment? I never thought I'd see the day where bids can come in 20%. The low bid was 20% over the engineer's estimate, and we'd still work to award it. All right, well, all those in favor then of the motion made by Gail to approve the tip amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, motion approves unanimously. The tip can get amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Shane, I am curious, how close was the number 2 bidder?
Number 1 and number 2 were just a couple of percentage points difference. Number 3 was about 10% higher.
That's good. Okay, terrific. Okay, John, the CDOT 10-year plan transit prioritized project list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I probably will kind of take B and C at the same time in the interest of time, because at this point, you've seen these 2 items more than once. So I think at this point, all we're looking to do it, because the last time you've seen it, it has not changed. We just wanted the sort of the dust to settle, make sure nothing else changed, and that everybody had an opportunity to look at everything. So item B, I believe, is the 10-year plan, which is a bigger list of projects. The change, there was no change since the last time you saw it, but the reason why it got changed, moved forward from that is I believe we wanted to add a fountain project. So Brandy, make sure your project's on there. It's where you want it. But that is that sort of that big list of the priorities for the 10 years. The next item, item C, Mr. Chair, is basically sort of the where we draw the funding line and what becomes what we're going to work on as a region over the next 4 years. Those items then have a little more detail and is a separate sheet. So first item that the board will approve when this moves forward is the complete list. Then it kind of, then they'll have the second item where they're just talking about the items that are funded. But again, you've seen this before. Just wanted to make sure that everyone was still cool with it. I think the last time we talked about it, we had Cdot here and they're like, yeah, we're not going to take anything back to the Transportation Commission, so we're done, sort of thing. And we just wanted to make sure that nothing else sort of came out and nothing changed before we take it back to the board, and it did not. So I think if everyone's comfortable, again, at this point, any questions on items B or C, or we would be looking for a motion to recommend approval to the Board of Directors for both items, please.
So B looks wonderful. It still has the $500,000 for Fountain, even though we've gone to decimal places instead of $500,000, but I'm assuming somebody somewhere knows it's in millions of dollars. And then I'm comfortable with C, but just probably going to mention that when this goes to the board, Sharon's going to want to discuss that $500,000 for Fountain. And I've talked to her about possibly putting it in the 5 to 10. I'm not sure that'll happen now. It might happen in more like 3 or 4 years, but I just want to give everybody a heads up that I'm pretty sure she's going to bring that up at the board, just so, again, anything can happen in 3 or 4 years, but it may end up in that 5 to 10 year list eventually, and it may end up in that 5 to 10 year list when it goes to the board. But right now I'm comfortable as it is, and then we'll just see what Sharon wants to do at the board level, and we'll go from there.
And so let's take the first two comments. First off is we changed the sort of the denomination of the placeholder. So it's dollars and millions or whatever, dollars and thousands. And that's not clear. So if we can make that change before it goes on to CAC and TAC. Okay, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And I want to make sure I understand. So right now on the first item, the Fountain list is just on there. And then when we talk about the second list, it's not part of the first 4 years, it's off. And you're saying that that's a problem, or did I
I'm just
misunderstand?
saying that it's not in the first 4 years or in the 5 to 10 year. And when I talked about bringing this forward, it was more of a discussion to get it in the 5 to 10 year. And then when I talked to Brian, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the 5 to 10 year today, because we've got time to get it in the 5 to 10 year when we have more of an idea of what that funding looks like. But in the next 2, 3, 4 years, as we discuss this and rediscuss this and rehash it, I'm anticipating that eventually that $500,000 will end up in the 5 to 10 years somewhere.
Right.
But we don't have enough information to have that conversation. But that doesn't mean that it won't be discussed at the board level.
Right. But I think if it's on this list, it's already in the 5 to 10, isn't that right, Jeff or Brian? Right? Because it's the 10-year plan. So it's on that first item, the 10-year plan. But then as we move to the second item, that's the first 4 years. So by default, if you're not in years 1 to 4, you're in years 5 to 10. So I think you're in that list already. Is that correct,
So if
Jeff?
somebody has the answer to that, that would be great.
Yeah, that is correct. There are only 3 projects identified for years 1 through 4. And those are high capacity corridor improvements, Fort Carson circulators, and Cdot's Bustang mobility hub in Fountain. So, I mean, Sharon should be a little bit pleased that there is a good transit project in Fountain, even though it's not the bus stop project that's in year 5 through 10.
So what I have on mine, Brian, is that you have 2 projects listed in 5 to 10 on item 6C. So if all of them are in the 5 to 10 year list, why are these 2 singled out?
Because those 2 are what meets the fiscal constraint for years 5 through 10.
Right. So that's what I'm commenting on, is that yes, they're on the 5 to 10 year list, but they're outside of that second list. And that's what I think she may
Right.
bring up at the board level. Okay, so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, John, thanks for the introduction of that. So let's, per the request, if we can make a recommendation, a motion to the board to approve the prioritized project list, then that'd be helpful.
So this is Brian. I'll recommend approval of the updated transit development prioritized project list for inclusion in CDOT's 10-year pipeline of projects. So this is agenda item 6B.
Thank you, Brian.
Second,
By
Randy.
Brandy. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other additional discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor of approving the motion as stated by Brian, please say aye.
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 Aye, sorry. Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, motion approved. per Brian's motion. All right, are we comfortable going on to 6C then as well? Okay, so we've been asked to review and recommend approval as well. So if I can ask for a motion on that on 6C, we'll need to state the name correctly, but I'm referencing a 6C.
This is
I actually have
Brian.
a question, Mr. Chair. Brian, could you please just address the third line item for the BNSF corridor purchase for multimodal facilities? I see that it's being removed from the constraint list, but it's still part of the 10-year plan, just for clarification.
I believe that is correct. Yeah, sorry, it's on the 5 to 10 year list, unfunded, but it is on that second list. Yes.
So thank you for that clarification. I move to approve agenda item 6C as presented by staff.
This is Brian. I'll second.
I would think you would, Brian. I would hope so too. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Any other additional discussion? Okay, again, all those in favor of approving motion made by Gail, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say nay. Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we had moved the next item down to informational items. So for respect out of Cdot's time real quick, we'll see if they want to go ahead and do their standing agenda item.
Hi, this is Kathleen. I can just say I have very few announcements to make. I don't know if Wendy or anyone else from CDOT has anything to add, but the STAC meetings have changed their dates to the first Thursdays of the month. And the statewide MPO meetings are going to be kept the same Thursday as they have been, even though we sent out a survey asking MPOs if they wanted to move it, but we're going to keep it the same. Michelle Sharman is retiring at the end of this month. She's been the senior planning advisor for the freight branch and for statewide planning. She's retiring at the end of the month. And that's all I have to report. Wendy or anyone else?
I don't have anything to add. How about you, Jeff?
There we go. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Jeff Guthrie here, Region 2 Transit. I just wanted to put on everyone's radar in case you have not heard of it. State Senate Bill 22-180. The title of this bill is concerning programs to reduce ground level ozone through increased use of transit. And there's two major intents of this bill. First, it's going to provide grants up to $3 million each year to a transit association. That's the language from the bill, and I can define that here in a second. Secondly, it should provide grants up to $11 million each year to the Regional Transportation District, RTD. These grants may be used to replace fare box revenue fund. This comes from the general fund. This is for the state-defined ozone season of June 1st through August 31st. And the grants to the Transit Association, as the bill says, that means a Colorado nonprofit corporation formed to represent transit interests in Colorado, whose membership includes transit agencies, transit-related businesses, and government entities. So yes, Mountain Metro as an example. And this is for the purpose of providing grants to eligible transit agencies in order to offer free transit services for a minimum of 30 days during that June 1st to August 31st ozone season. And the second major part of this bill is that it transfers $30 million from the general fund to start a 3-year pilot Mustang expansion. And that's along Interstate 25 North and then Interstate 25 South, down in this neck of the woods, and then the I-70 West, the mountain corridor. And that will increase frequencies each year. There was a plan in yesterday's TC work session that details the planned expansion, but DTR is currently looking at a service development plan to more precisely map that out with Mustang. And so keep your eye on that. And I think that's pretty interesting just to provide those free fares each summer during that peak of the ozone season. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might, under the CDOT item, just mention that we did have the PPACG mid-year review for our work program. So we had our friends at CDOT down here in the room, as well as we had FHWA and FTA on the phone. And I think it went very well. So again, we appreciate CDOT's assistance in putting that on.
Thanks for the update. Is there data that suggests that the cost of writing prohibits the usage? So is there support that says if you make the fares free for a month, ridership will increase accordingly?
It seems to be a little bit of if you build it, they will come. Speaking from my own experience, Summit County for 21 years has had a fare-free transit system that approaches 2 million people in ridership every single year. And so just anecdotally, without offering that exact data, the data does exist around the country.
Okay.
But trust me, that ridership will be very closely looked at every single day, every single trip, analyzing travel patterns, really just looking at, are we spending money in the right places, increasing the frequency in the right places, using the correct vehicle so it's not a big 40 passenger.
Do you still have to get a ticket electronically, but it's free? So that way you don't have 100 people show up for a bus and have 45 seats?
Reserved seats, I believe, but Gail's shaking.
I've never had a good
But busing?
busing.
That's what I'm
Right.
asking, if it's just a free reservation, but you still have to go in and make a,
So far, that's, yes,
okay.
that's the plan.
I know something about free reservations. Okay.
I just
thanks.
feel like a Foghat song coming on, but a free ride, but that's just me.
John, you realize you dated yourself. Those youngsters don't know what that is.
Well, I got to date myself. Nobody else will date me.
I'll make a quick announcement here, and it's Glenn Krause from Cdot. And very quickly, the super call is coming up, tentatively scheduled for release on July 5th. It's going to include funding for 5304 grants, 5311, and some other funding. So be on the lookout for that for those who are looking out. And yes, I know what free ride is. Yeah.
Good to hear from you, Glenn. We look forward to you when you can come down and join us here at the TAC in person. Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
And if you do it after June 1st, you can ride down here for free and actually get a free ride. How's that?
Sounds good. I live in town anyway.
Yeah, I was about to say, little known fact, Glenn actually lives here in Colorado Springs. That's
Oh.
why I'm trying to say, it's not that far. Come on over. Good to see you.
That's right. All right. CDOT, any other updates or comments that we need to know about? Okay, thank you.
Not that I'm
Oh,
aware of.
thank you,
The only other thing I guess I might say is that Monday, we're having the Central Front Range meeting for the MMOF process for the Central Front Range. And if you're an applicant, you need to be there in person to give your 5-minute spiel on your project. And I don't know if there's anybody in our audience that turned in an application, but I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. And the meeting location has been changed from the traffic center and Divide to our CDOT office over on Quail Lake because of the command issues with the fire in Teller County. And they asked us to move the meeting. So that was done yesterday, I believe, and an updated invitation was sent out.
Yeah, it's a Central Front Range TPR. So overall, Colorado, 15 TPRs, first 5 are the MPOs. We're MPO number 1, or we're TPR number 1, the Pikes Peak MPO, and then Central Front Range, which is basically everything else plus, is it Fremont County? What's Fremont? Yeah. So yeah. So basically, I think the announcement, that announcement was basically only for El Paso County and Teller County if they were on the line. Those are the
So
only.
it's Park, Teller, Custer, Fremont, El Paso.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, for no other comments from CDOT, thank you. Danelle, if we want to go to, yes, the funding naming convention to for ETIP.
Sure, happy to. So this, there's a typo right there that I didn't see before. This item came about from a local agency request to look into altering some of the funding sources in the ETIP, the naming convention of those funding sources, so that they can be more in line with the STIP, so that it's easier for folks to see and correlate the projects. So for example, there's a couple of items on your memo here. The ETIP, for instance, may use STBGP and stimulus in parentheses, whereas the STIP uses PPK. That's their acronym for the Pikes Peak area stimulus money. So we would need to take a look at cross-referencing those and figuring out a naming convention that would work here at PPACG, that everybody, if you look at the ETIP, you would know what you're looking at and could understand that. Victoria, Wendy, would you like to talk a little bit about this as well? And before you jump in, I did run this through Paige and Jamie Collins up at Cdot headquarters, and they were all for it. They felt like it would be a good step to take. They're also looking internally themselves at some naming convention standards to push forward. So it may evolve a little bit in the coming months.
Sure, Danelle, thanks. Thank you for bringing this item too, because this was completely upon my request. My engineers brought this issue to me, and as they were doing some IGAs, they were trying, they had this acronym of PPK, and they kept asking me, what's PPK? And I'm like, I have no idea what PPK is. And so I did some digging, and with the help of Cdot and Wendy and some other people, I was able to get this giant list of acronyms and realize that the STIP and the TIP have two different names for the same amount of funding. And the issue for them was that there are certain deadlines that are associated with different funding sources, but they couldn't correlate that from what was in the TIP to what was in the IGA, because the IGA was using the STIP acronyms and not the TIP acronyms. So Danelle and John, graciously agreed to bring this to you all in hopes that we can, marry up those two so that it's really easy to tell from your IGA what your funding source is and what your deadline is. So thank you very much for bringing it. I hope you all consider this.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, we can be as flexible as the computer software allows us to be, which is actually very flexible. The only things that we have to keep in mind, since Aaron Busto is not on the call, is from the Fed's point of view. And again, I say this cautiously because things change, right? I've stood up and say, I've been doing this for 20 years and you need to do this. And then someone points out that the rule has changed in the last few years. So provided they haven't changed the rule on this old guy, the Feds will not obligate a project unless they can see full funding in the TIP. So you can't just remove stuff or lump it someplace else where it's not there. So they want to see full funding in that TIP document when they authorize or obligate the funds. The second thing that, again, we can be as flexible as you want us to be, but the one thing that we need to keep in mind is at the end of the year, when we roll over the TIP and we do everything that we need to do with the Feds, is the Feds, again, from us, from a PPACG perspective, want to see that we have fiscal constraint, that we're not saying, hey, we've got $10 million worth of revenues, but then our document shows $12 million worth of distributions. We have to have fiscal constraint across the whole program, across every year, and by fund source. So when we have these fund sources that sort of do these wacky things, it's the same thing but named differently, we just have to make sure it correlates within our document. So anything short of telling us to not show something, we're happy to do, and we can have multiple fund sources and have that fiscal constraint analysis. And Brandy, I know you hate when I use fiscal constraint, but yeah, but as long as we can show that at the end of the TIP cycle, whether it be every year or every 2 years, that's the only real things we're concerned about. So anything we can do to make things easier for the jurisdictions, we're happy to do. Just tell us what it is and we'll get it done.
And what we can do is if we're going to change some of our naming convention, we could put together some sort of cheat sheet or cross-reference or list and distribute that to everybody. So you actually know what the names mean.
If I can add, that's exactly what I was going to ask for. I don't have an issue with it, but I would ask that you provide a matrix with what the old PPACG naming convention is, what the new PPACG/DIP naming convention is, and actually can we add a third column that correlates it to the actual federal funding source name, since that's a different name also. Thank you.
So since Victoria brought this up and in referencing the IGAs, which language is going to be the base naming convention that will modify to?
It would align with what's in the STIP.
Okay, so the good thing about that is that, we've been using the STIP for a long time, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of new terms. It's just, we're not used to them maybe as locally. Okay.
Yeah, but I think we'll also have the ability to sort of cross reference. That's, another thing is, again, within that TIP database, we have the ability to put extra notes in. So that way, again, if someone's looking for something and they can't find it, or maybe if we can get those extra sort of cross-reference
Sure.
Names in there, then that way people can actually find things. So
there'll just be a transitional period.
Yeah.
Okay, questions for Danelle? So Danelle, the plan is that you guys are going to work on some proposed wording, some language, a potential matrix that shows the before and the after, and then some cross-referencing so it's easy to understand. And then that probably would not necessarily need a board act, not need an action. It's just really more of a, do we agree with this approach type thing?
right, yeah, this is a thing that doesn't need to go any further
Yeah.
than TAC. This is one of your own sort of business rules.
Okay.
So in fact, if we've got consensus, when we bring it back, we could bring it back as some information and we've got consensus, we'll just do it. Or we can bring it back as an action item. I don't think we have a preference, but if you guys are more comfortable having it be an action item, we can be an action item. If you want it to be more discussion, we can do either way, whatever you guys are comfortable with.
Okay, we can approach that when that happens, but I can't imagine we would need to do an action item either, so. Okay, any other questions for Danelle? Okay, John, your favorite topic, please.
Oh, we're going to talk about Star Wars. I'm really psyched about Kenobi. Oh, no, you mean greenhouse. That was sarcasm.
So was
Okay.
mine.
That was like my real favorite topic, not my sarcastic favorite topic. Yeah, so the state of Colorado has implemented some greenhouse gas reductions through SB 2260. And when they did that, they came up with a whole bunch of things. And the bottom line is they basically said, so all of the MPOs and Cdot, what we're going to do is look at your current long-range plans and have you take those current long-range plans and the projects in them and consider that a baseline. And based on those baseline projects, and I say projects because they kind of went back and forth and they said, well, if people change models and change assumptions, that can change the greenhouse gas output just by that. So they said, so no matter what your model is, you put your baseline projects in and you get a result. And then you put your new projects in and you get a result. That way, you're able to update your model and refine your model without it screwing up your baseline in theory. So from that, so that's the reason why we call it baseline projects. From the baseline projects, PPACG, which I've highlighted in yellow, please note the awesome PowerPoint skills. We're in 2030, we're expected to reduce our GHG by 0.15 million metric tons. By 2040, 1.2 million metric tons, and by 2050, 0.7 metric tons. And Will, you'll need to have your mic on and help me out, but I think a lot of that sort of over time is that they are anticipating a couple of things that will already go into that reduction. The electrification of the fleet. They expect by the time we get to 2050, there will be a 90% penetration of EV, 97. See, that's why I need them here. 97% penetration into the EV fleet. That is, out of 100 cars, 97 of them will be electric, and there will be only 3 of those combustion diesel GHG belching vehicles on the road for light duty, because we've taken the heavy duty is not included in this. So that's why it sort of goes. The other assumption, and again, help me out here, Will, is that all regions will increase their transit out ridership by 6% year over year, so that there's assumed to be less vehicles. So after you take the transit reduction and the EV reduction, with all of that, we're still not meeting our requirements. So we have to remove additional vehicles from the roadway.
Just to clarify, it is a 6% annual increase up to the year 2030,
Oh,
and then it is a 2% annual increase years after that.
thank you.
Can I interject real quick then?
Sure.
Brian, have you ever had a 6% year over year increase?
He is now.
No.
I just thought I'd ask. Thank you.
So the bottom line is for PPACG, these are the things that we're required to do through our long range plan, and we are to show these through modeling exercise. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this, and I apologize, when I grabbed it from a Cdot PowerPoint, you could see it a lot better, but it's not quite as crisp as I thought it was. But basically, this is the Cdot sort of planning rule, and I'll give you sort of the Reader's Digest version. Is you decide what your projects are, you model those projects. If they are, if you meet those GHG goals for those particular years, you then have a compliant plan. You submit to Cdot. They make sure that you used proper modeling techniques to show that you have a compliant plan. And if everything says that, yes, you modeled it correctly, you're ready, you can go back to your region and you can move forward with the process. If you do that first model and you are not compliant, you basically have 2 options. You can just go back and change your project mix, where you would take projects out that are capacity building or increased GHG, and you would put in projects that have a better GHG footprint, for lack of a better term. So more transit, more bikes, more pedestrians, that sort of thing. And you can just do that as an iterative model and go back and forth until you hit compliance. Or you've said, well, there are some projects we don't want to take out because they're safety projects and they're safety concerns. We don't want to do that. So option 1 is you just change the mix, then you eventually get there. But then the option 2 is, again, you can either go back to Cdot and say, hey, we've done all we can. We have 1 or 2 projects, but they're safety projects. We'd like to ask for a waiver. And if they grant your waiver, then you can move on with the process. Or you can go through a mitigation process whereby you add projects to the plan that are not modelable, that can't be modeled. And when you say, well, we're going to do these projects that cannot be modeled, and we get some points. And at the end of the slide here, I've got some slides of what it is. But for example, it says if you build sidewalks, but again, I think sidewalks can be modeled, so that's a little bit of a weird issue. But Cdot says if you build sidewalks, you get X amount of reduction by metric ton for every mile you build. And I think we'd have to build a sidewalk from here to China. Is that right? 8,000 miles?
8,000 miles, but it all has to be in an urban area.
So yeah, we'd have to build 8,000 miles in the urban area. But that would get us the mitigation that is necessary. So we would resubmit a report saying, hey, we're not compliant, but here's our 8,000 miles of mitigation. They approve the mitigation plan. We can go to the folks and get the plan adopted, and then we can move forward. And then eventually, behind the scenes, every year, Will and I will have to do a mitigation plan update or mitigation plan report. Yeah, and we have to do an annual report. So even though this is all sort of modeling and not based on sort of real life, we just have to rerun the model and expect that the model is going to say something different and then give them the results. But that's sort of that's the process. So if I could get the next slide, please. This is how it would sort of look in real life. So this is the PPACG long range training plan process. Thank you for making it bigger. My old eyes, thank you. So what's in black is the way it used to be. And then now that they've adopted this new plan, that's the stuff in red. So just our normal process, vision and goals, right? But what's new is part of the vision and goals, we're going to have to talk about GHG compliance. Then we're going to go through and we're going to review the existing plan and anticipated challenges that we have. And that's, again, where Will's going to sort of model the region and say where our hotspots are and stuff like that. We're going to review the old projects and do all those things. But here's what's new is, again, the new part is we're going to have the GHG targets as part of that process. Development of the financial plan. Again, this is something we always did, but now we'll add the money that we're getting from SB 260 MMOF. Then we'll go through our call for projects. If you notice, that's one of the boxes that kind of didn't have any red touched on it, because that'll stay the same, right? Except now when we sort of do our call for projects, you all will know that we do have GHG goals, and you will know how much extra funds would be available by MMOF. We'll go through that project review where we score projects and everything else. Again, here's the new one where we would probably add points for GHG, projects that are identified to reduce GHG or have a positive GHG benefit. Then we go over into the modeling, and just as we hit, we did before, we always had to model it for Title VI compliance. We'll probably have a little extra bit on the disadvantaged communities requirements that we was added by SB 260, but then we'll also have to model for GHG. Thing we want to mention here is that, again, we need to have an IGA with Cdot where they look at how Will runs the model and make sure that they're cool with his assumptions and that he's not trying to circumvent the process by coming up with assumptions that aren't assumptable. Right. When that modeling gets done, we also have to send it to PPACG to review and for them to do their air quality modeling. So now I'm going to go into that sort of the bottom half of this, but I need to catch my breath. Does anybody have any questions? You're going to wait till I'm done? Okay. So then all right, if after Will does all of the modeling, there's two possible outcomes. And you see it shoots over to the green box. It's a compliant plan. So we've run the model. We've met the GHG requirements. We don't have to go through any of that other rigmarole. It's a compliant plan. We have our draft plan. We still have to have the GHG report sort of reviewed to make sure that everything's cool. But then we do our public outreach. If during the public outreach, we have a bunch of people show up and say, oh, I don't know, they don't want the project running through their neighborhood or whatever. And so then we need to do changes. We run it back through the process, but provided the public outreach goes well, we do the official 30-day public comment period and we get adoption, right? That's the way it used to be. That's the same. On the off chance that we do the modeling and it's a non-compliant plan, See what I did there? If we have a non-compliant plan, then we have a couple of options. First is that we just sort of go back and we change the project mix, and we keep on changing the project mix until we get a compliant plan. Now, it is possible that at the end of the day, we change all of the projects out. We take out all the capacity projects. We put in all of the GHG improving projects, and we're still not in compliance, because the way it works is, again, this is based on vehicle miles traveled and travel speed. And so we're taking our existing projects and we need to show a reduction from where they are. So it's quite possible that, again, if you've got your existing projects and you need to reduce from there, that the growth that's happened in your region does not allow you to add anything new. And so therefore, you can't build anything new. We'll have to say no new projects. We put all that in. And even after we put in all the bicycle and pedestrian and transit and all those other good things into the plan, that we're not compliant. At that point, there's nothing left for them to take. There's no more funds to convert. So when that happens, that's that sort of dark pink box. We have a non-compliant plan. However, all of the federal funds have been restricted to non-GHG sort of projects. Then that line goes back over, and I put it back to the draft plan, and Will corrected me, and I haven't had time to fix this yet. It goes up to that compliant plan. So instead of it being the draft plan box, it goes up to the green box. Because at that point, we are compliant, because we've put in all the projects they can. We've used all our federal dollars. There's nothing left to change. So that's that. There's no mitigation plan. It's our normal plan, but we've taken all the blood out of that stone. You can't do any more. And then it goes through the normal process. The other sort of, again, option, which I've sort of touched on earlier, so I don't want to waste your time, is we either go through the mitigation process and then have the mitigations either approved by Cdot or not approved. If it's not approved, we start over again, or we go through the waiver. But either way, you go through that process. If you do go the mitigation plan route, again, there will be an annual GHG reporting that we will do as staff sort of behind the scenes. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know it's a lot. And Wendy, I think you have your hand up.
I do. How much do you think this process is going to add to the long range planning process?
Time wise, it will add at least 100. There's 60 days to get the one thing reviewed by PPACG, and then I think another 30, 45 days, I can't remember, to have the Transportation Commission review and do your plan. So I think it's at a minimum 90 days, but I think it's 120. Do you remember offhand?
That is correct. And the additional time that we need for modeling it's hard to determine because we're not changing anything for the initial batch, right? We're going to take our project mix, we're going to submit it and see where things shake out for GHG. What might take time is Cdot has said that they are willing to try and model individual projects, but we have not yet established how that'll work, how much will need to be included for that. And the purpose for trying to model individual projects is so that we can show that easing the congestion might lead to a reduction in greenhouse gases, and therefore that is not a GHG positive project. And if we can show that through individual modeling, then we might be able to get a waiver for that as we submit the plan. But because we're not sure what that's going to look like at the process steps and what needs to be included, we can't at this point estimate how long that might add to the overall process.
And
So
that
basic,
go ahead, Wendy.
so basically what you're saying then is we probably need to make sure that we have about 6 months of cushion to cover all these processes. And if we have some sort of an issue, and you know how those things kind of come up and things slip and things don't work out exactly as we plan. So does that mean that we need to look at maybe 9 months more? I mean, I don't see how this is a good thing to add that kind of time onto the the process, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, you answered, but I'm kind of hoping Wendy gets on the transportation board because
That is a fair assessment, and these are concerns that we have raised. We've internally kind of figured in the back of our minds that 6 months should cover this. There's something to be considered for the fact that if we're not close on the initial run, then there might not be a lot of additional work necessary from the modeling standpoint. We'll know that we're not close, and therefore anything that's not a GHG reduction will probably have to be removed from anything whose funds can be constrained. And that simplifies the process. So if it comes out close and we think that we might be able to get something in, if we can show that, through waivers that some projects should be allowed to pass, then that would be the most time consuming aspect. And like I said, unfortunately, we still have not worked out those details of what it would look like to submit that through Cdot.
So you're talking about your capacity projects, but what about our capacity projects? So when those projects are planned, should they come to you with that greenhouse gas run already done?
Probably, but for the most part, all of the Cdot projects within the MPO area count against our number. So we will have to decide as a region, if we only have this much worth of capacity, do we want to do Woodman Road or do we want to do I-25? And I can tell you right now, I don't think the feds are going to be happy with our answer. I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
just to
I
add
just
on to that,
wonder. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I mention our projects, I do mean when we are considering all the projects within the MPO that includes CDOT projects.
Okay. I'm just kind of wondering what we do when we can't spend the money.
Yeah, that's a good question. And one other thing I want to just mention before we go over to Gail is PPRTA, while it counts towards our model, PPRTA is not a funding source that can be restricted. It is a promise to the voters, and anything that is PPRTA ballot language will continue to move forward. The caveat to that is if it's a PPRTA project with STP with any sort of federal funding attached to it, then that gets messy because that in theory needs to be taken off that project and moved elsewhere on a non-capacity sort of project. So that is another way that we were told up and down, and they swore up and down at the legislature this would not impact the PPRTA. And we kept on saying that it definitely could have an impact on the PPRTA. So for any future PPRTA projects, as this moves forward, unless they come back and they have a different interpretation and they make this much easier, you'll want to make sure that you 100% fund PPRTA projects with PPRTA so that they're bulletproof and that this rule cannot touch it.
So basically what you're saying is it kills that public private partnership that we've worked so hard to build.
I don't feel comfortable saying that, especially since the meetings are recorded. And, we are trying to take the high road and do compliance. And I would be happy to be here a year from now and say that I was wrong and that we're able to do projects and that we've seen all this great air quality improvement and everything has worked wonderful. I'm the first person that would be happy to say I was wrong. Unfortunately, I don't think what their approach is actually touches why people drive and how they drive. So therefore, I don't see any actual reductions in driving. In fact, I see our air quality getting worse because of this. And I can't say whether or not we will be allowed to do projects or not, because we'll have to see how CDOT and Dr. Cog and North Front Range do this. Because if they figured out some methodology by which they can do projects, I assure you, we will copy that methodology and we will allow you guys to do projects as well.
Well, it's really lucky for the southern part of the state here, the southeastern corner, that they get to go first, right?
Yes.
So I have a bulletproof PPRTA question. Bulletproof in the fact that they can spend their money and build their roads, but not necessarily bulletproof because that is taken into consideration with the model.
Yes,
So while they get to do what they need to do and what they want to do, that is going to impact projects that CDOT has, project that individual municipalities have. So
that is a correct
it's
statement.
bulletproof on one hand, but it doesn't really help the math on the other hand.
Right, yeah, they cannot restrict those funds, so therefore those projects can move forward. But for all the other projects they can restrict, it does hurt those because all of this stuff is in our model. That's the other thing that I will freely admit, and if you guys have any input on how I should do this presentation when I get to the board, so I don't sound like an idiot, I would be happy to take it. But here's one thing I can't get my paws around. CDOT has 10 TPRs by which in those 10 TPRs, they have existing projects and they need to reduce those projects by 90% by 2050 and show their reduction, right? Because nothing they do in the MPO does. So they've talked about, well, we can individually model those projects so that we can show that they're not a greenhouse gas producer. But anything that they build still goes into the model and it still counts towards the overall thing. So how they're somehow going to take those out. And again, if they've got a way of running the model where they're somehow isolating all of the traffic and everything else that happens by non-capacity projects, and then they run the model, well, then I guess that's the only way they're ever going to be able to do it. And if that's the way they do it, well, by howdy, Will and I are going to figure out how to do that. And we're going to isolate our projects and we're going to do it the same way. But I am hard pressed to figure out how CDOT is going to be able to build anything statewide into 2030. But every stack meeting, they always promise, yep, we're not going to hurt the rules. We're not going to hurt the rules. We're still going to build all your projects. And I just don't know how they expect that they're going to keep that promise at the same time saying that they're going to continue with this. But if they do, like I said, we will copy that methodology and we will use it. Is that fair to say, or did I get it wrong? Yeah, but everything still goes into the model.
When would this take place?
When will it take place?
Yeah.
The rule has already been adopted.
Okay.
And the mitigation measures was adopted by the Transportation Commission this morning. So all of the, so for North Front Range and DRCOG and CDOT, they have to now have compliance. Can we go back to the first slide? Is that a big deal? If you go back to the first slide, you notice that they have numbers, basically the 2030 reduction level. So CDOT's got to show 0.36 reduction by a plan that they adopt in October. North Front Range needs to show a 0.12 reduction by a plan that they have done by October, and DRCOG has to show 0.82 reduction by a plan that they do by this November. So those three are in the barrel first, and they will need to have updated their plans by October of this year. So we will learn a lot about how this all works. And if they all kind of, well, CDOT won't because of the political ramifications, but for DRCOG and North Front Range, if they just both sort of say, yeah, we're going to take out all the roadway projects, then we certainly know how this is going to move forward. However, if they say, well, these are the roadway projects we're doing, and here's how we're doing them, then we have a pattern we can follow.
This is Will. I just wanted to also interject and again point out that these reduction levels are not from the models that were already submitted or the plans that have already been submitted. This is reduction from the models that had been submitted to CDOT. So in our case, the 2045 adopted long-range transportation plan. And then they again reduced that based on expected penetration of light-duty EV and that 6% annual growth in transit, as well as a couple of other factors that were assumed in terms of land use changes to come up with the baseline. And then we have to reduce what you see on this chart from that baseline, which already represents a significant reduction of what actually is current.
And so Debbie, to answer your question, so those guys have to do it by October of this year. We at PPACG are not required to do it until our next plan. which I think have scheduled, and Mark Northrup, I know you're on the call. Tell me if I get this wrong. I think our next plan is due by January of 2025, but our schedule is shooting for December of 2024. So Debbie, if we will be doing this over the next few years. And so the construction of our next long range plan, for example, before I would just say, hey, give me all your projects. Now I'm going to say, give me all your projects, but I'm going to need them banded by things we think we're going to build before 2030, things we're going to do between 2031 and 2040, and things we're going to do between 2041 and 2050. And the reason for that is in the past, we just had all of the projects together, but that meant that they could happen at any time. So therefore, all of them would hit against that 2030 reduction, which means we would never make it. So we need to sort of stratify. Ooh, I used the big word correctly, right? We're going to have to stratify our plan into sort of that 2030, 2040, and 2050 bands to make sure that we model it so that we're not hurting ourselves or double counting in the early years for projects that are really going to be in the later years. So that's one of the first things you'll notice up front is instead of me just saying, give me your projects and tell me how much. Now I'm going to say, give me your projects, tell me how much, and tell me when you think you would be ready to build it. And then as we go through the process as a region, you all, when you prioritize projects, because again, I don't do that, you guys do that, you're going to have to decide when in the time frame you're going to want to do some of these projects instead of either before. All you had to do is say, is it in, is it out? You have to say if it's in, and if it's in, where is it in? Yeah, I said that right. So does that answer the question, Debbie?
Yeah, I was just curious because of the Jackson Creek Parkway project that's in right now. I don't know if I have to do anything different to any application moving forward for that project.
No. And I think by the time this all happens, you should be far enough along. There's no way that they could really stop the project. I do think.
Okay, that's what I was worried about. Okay.
John, so it's based on our 2045 plan. So there's going to be whatever modeling is going to occur, which is a whole nother can of worms. And they're going to predict that if you do these projects between now and 2045, by 2045, we will be producing this much greenhouse gas. So then, but they're saying, so what we want you to do is we want you to reduce from that amount. So if we do build all those projects, we have to come up with additional ways of mitigating that greenhouse gas creation.
Right. There's the baseline projects, because we've already sort of said what
Right.
projects we were gonna do. Of those baseline projects, when we remodel them, given any other sort of positive things that have gone out there, be that EV penetration or transit use or other sorts of things. When we model that, if the baseline number versus the other number reduces by that 0.15 in 2030, and then over the
Right.
then you're golden. But yes, if we model that and we don't show the reduction from the baseline, then those projects need to change. So we either change the project mix, or we do the mitigation, or we do the other. But again, as Will has said, I think the mitigation is one of those things. It's one of probably the last thing anybody will do, because there's no benefit to it. Because if I take funds and I move it over to something else, and it's in the model, there's no benefit to going through that mitigation process, because it's extra work, and they've really gone out of their way not to incent. Originally, when we started talking about this 2 years ago, we thought there'd be incentives. There's, in my opinion, and whatever that's worth, there's zero incentives to do any of these mitigation things, because they haven't said, oh, well, if you do this, we think it's going to reduce GHG by 1. And so they go through all this data and they say, yep, it's going to be 1. If they really wanted to incentivize it, they'd say, if you do these things, even though we're only getting 1 out of it, we're going to give you 2, right? There's absolutely no incentivization in this at all. They insist that they need hard data for everything. Anybody that wants to do anything, there has to be hard data to do it. And then the only mitigation you'll get is what you can prove. Well, if you're gonna go through all of that rigmarole, you're just gonna put it in the model. So I suspect that 0 MPOs are gonna actually do the mitigation measures.
So, and the modeling, in general, does it consider that adding capacity increases greenhouse gas production?
Vehicle miles.
In general, there's a strong correlation between the vehicle hours traveled and the vehicle miles traveled within the model to GHG. It is very difficult to show an increase in either the VHT or VMT without a commensurate increase in greenhouse gas. It is not entirely impossible, but again, it would almost be, like we mentioned earlier, on a project by project basis. So for example, we might be able to show that adding capacity on I-25 between Fillmore and Garden of the Gods during AM and PM traffic hours might actually reduce the overall GHG load by increasing the average speed and therefore reducing idling and that kind of thing. But there's a lot that goes into it to show that results in an actual GHG reduction. In addition, our model would also have to include the effects of induced demand to show that while the flow has increased, therefore more traffic is liable to go ahead and end up on that road, and that might offset whatever benefits we show.
Wendy, do you have a question?
I do. So what happens if we have the same kind of situation that we're dealing with today with Shane's shortfall in his project, but instead of it being in the Central Front Range, it's in PPACG? I mean, you can't just take something from the another project and do, you'd have to, if you add scope, you change scope, all that would have to be remodeled before we could make a decision whether we go forward or not, right?
No, I don't. I really don't want to say anything.
Hi, Wendy, this is Will. You know, it's possible, because if it was already part of the approved or mix in the adopted plan, then that wouldn't necessarily pose an issue. So when we submit for the 2050 long range transportation plan, and however that gets adopted, that project mix is already in there. So if it was one project that was already part of the approved plan and we had to take funding out of that or some other projects in order to cover a financial shortfall in order to fund another project that again was already approved, then that really wouldn't pose a problem. Where it would come into play, where we would have to remodel, is if we wanted to try and do an adoption and add a project into the mix so that it can be eligible for TIP or some other funding source.
So let me ask you this, just playing devil's advocate. So what happens if the project we're taking the funds from is the fact that we have to do something because we have an issue, an emergency, something that we have to add on to, and then the funding that we're taking from the other project that's been programmed was one of our projects, like you just discussed, about the fact that by adding the capacity, it reduces the greenhouse gas issue. I mean, there's all different types of things that this is going to bring up. And I'm going to stop, because I mean, I could let my brain go on forever and keep you tied up all afternoon with different questions. So I'll just leave it at that. I know that I'm talking in circles, and we're all in the same place. So we just have to figure out what Dr. Cog is going to get away with first, and I guess then we'll know how we can make things work.
I can neither confirm nor deny the Dr. Cog strategy. All right. Are there any other questions? Do you want me to move on to the next slide?
I just want to go back to what you asked. You asked about going from the 2045 and going down, but you may have missed it just before Will said they're going to take the 2045 and then they're subtract this and this and this, and then create a baseline, in my opinion, very arbitrarily. And then from that, you have to get the 0.15.
That's already started. That is correct. And that, again, that is the process they've already gone through. They took our 2045 project mix, they ran it through the EarPat model by Cambridge Systematics, and then put in a bunch of variables that were not originally included in our plan, such as the EV penetration, transit rate increase, and some land use changes in order to come up with the baseline, and then remodeled to get a GHG baseline, and then compared that to what SB 260 or 261 required the overall state reduction to be, broke that out by population and said, okay, this is your share of what you now have to further reduce.
So
Yeah.
John, do you have more slides?
I do,
We're
but
only mid slides. Okay, then I'll wait for Gail.
Okay, I'm gonna try to, I think that some of the questions have been asked by Wendy. I just wanted to make sure I kind of understood the waiver process. If we had to go through individual process to the waiver, does the waiver come from CDPHE?
it
Or
comes
does it go to
from
the Transportation Commission?
Transportation Commission.
Okay. Does CDPHE have an opinion or review that at all and provide?
Not to my knowledge. To my knowledge, they are in on looking at the modeling and they are in on the mitigation plan. But it's changed literally every other week. So Will, did I get that wrong? That's what I remember.
That's where we're at.
Yeah, we think that that's where the process is.
Okay, I think some of the other questions are, let's talk about the all federal funding piece of it. My understanding was that it was only going to restrict funding that came from STBG or CMAQ money from a federal standpoint. And I thought there were some
That's true.
going to be strings to some state funds.
Well, PPACG has no state funds that flow that we are responsible for doing. So obviously, if you apply for a state grant and then you receive the state funds, that's where the state can get you. But through the PPACG process and what's in the long range plan is only our STP Surface Transportation Block Grant funds, excuse me, our transportation alternatives or TAP funds, and now soon to be coming into the door are carbon reduction funds that we're getting from the feds. We do not
And
receive.
MMOF, and that's what
Yeah,
you would
that's what I
get
thought.
credit for with your
Thank you.
your mitigation. So your MMOF funds might need to be used as mitigation, and those are state funds, John.
Yeah, you're right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I forgot, but
No,
yes.
no,
so-
no, was specifically what I was
So-
thinking about. And no discussion or implications on TAP funding. And then maybe this is more of a question for Wendy, would that also count towards mitigation potentially?
So TAP funding, again, can be restricted, but it's already restricted for these uses anyway. You can't be using TAP funds on capacity building projects anyway. Their TAPs are supposed to be by definition, those sorts of things. Some of those weird sort of things where you lump it in with a bigger project, that would probably go away.
Okay. Specific to the 2025 model, and then right now, we have Woodman Road in the tip, at least for all the engineering work for and then the first construction package. Is it feasible, since it was included in the plan, it should be included in the model that project could continue? If we show reductions other areas within the 2045 plan?
I don't know. I'll let Will give you the technical answer, but again, I just don't know. I don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, it should be okay because of the way they could approach all of this. And if they bring out the hammer, it is conceivable that even projects that we've started thinking about are going to get pulled off the table if they have the ability. If they're using federal dollars, then I think Cdot has the ability to pull those off the table, and they are in fact not safe. That being said, I also see some of these other things and what Dr. Cog might be doing and what North Range would be doing, and even Cdot doing, that it's also conceivable that it would be safe moving forward. But I'm not sure we could tell you one way or another until we sort of wait till early next year and see all these other things. But Will, do you have more of a technical answer?
Not so much a technical answer. I would say that, yes, it's in our mix of projects that'll be submitted for the 2050 LRTP. It was part of the last amendment, and that's why it was able to be included in the TIP, obviously. And so that project, as well as a few others that we've kind of discussed with CDOT, and what we've heard back is if it's already contracted, then CDOT can't step in. Nobody can step in and revoke that and change it. However, they have mentioned that, well, you might have funding secured and contracted for certain phases of a project, and therefore you might have the study and that has to be allowed to go forward. But if you don't have a contract for the actual construction, then it's possible that might be something that they can step on. And that's where it's kind of gray. Nobody really knows because I don't know that anybody's really gone into the legal aspects of how that is, or if it's all grouped under one project number in our tip or one project in the LRTP, if that kind of saves it versus multiple project numbers.
Okay, well, that actually, I'm going to come back to my old question, but then I want to revisit that. Kind of go back in the federal funding. If we're seeking discretionary federal grants and we're awarded those, how would that impact or play into or have potentially restrictions placed on it because of the GHG rules?
When we asked, we were told that it would not impact it at all. And that if we were able to get any of the federal discretionary dollars, they would be ours to keep. That being said, I think that's all sort of based on interpretation, and so if you get.
Well, and I do think that's going to be important and I think we should ask now, and it's not just getting the award, because federal highways, assuming it's overseen by FHWA, federal highways has already approved Cdot's processes and not necessarily the processes for each local government. So a lot of times those funds get assigned to Cdot. And in my case, if we were the awardee, the city would be the subrecipient. Does that give them different controls on those dollars in this whole discussion? Or do we know the answer to that question?
All I know is that when we specifically asked, the CDOT was, we are not going to send back any money to DC. So if you get money that through a grant process, they were going to keep it. So I don't know if that doesn't answer your question, but that's sort of the best I have. I apologize.
I think we would just, unfortunately, intentionally have to bypass CDOT on some of that to keep from having jeopardizing, even if it's a direct award. Anyway, we'll cross that bridge up later.
We'll cross that bridge if we can afford
it. Well, so this is my other question. I think, Will, you did start to hit on this in your previous response, that we could still use STBG monies for engineering. I mean, the preliminary engineering, NEPA, final engineering, and not necessarily go and seek construction dollars.
My comment was in relation to whether or not those funds would be at jeopardy for being changed to the Transportation Commission if our plan does not hit the GHG requirements. So they would look at it and say, this project or these projects, because they've already been committed to funds, even if it's just a study, then there's nothing they would change there. But anything that has not had funding committed, we would have to go ahead and change the project mix of those. And they've been very clear that when we change the project mix, the only thing that we will be able to change it to is to projects that explicitly reduce GHG or can be shown to reduce GHG through that waiver process that I mentioned. So safety operational projects would not be allowed if we haven't hit the GHG reduction target. Everything would have to go towards projects that reduce GHG until we hit that target. And then whatever funds are left over could be used towards whatever.
Okay. And then maybe I'm going to rephrase the question because I'm trying to come up with ways of what we can spend the money on up front that may still keep us eligible for the dollars. For example, if we were just to apply for just engineering dollars or just apply for a bridge, soon we aren't adding lanes unless they're bike lanes or facilities.
Yeah, and I think the language is specific that says unless it improves GHG. So any of these things, so if you take some federal dollars and you do a study for something that's not improving GHG, so it's not going to be allowable if you are not compliant. Now, if you are compliant and you spend money on that I think that would be fine in that the model doesn't pick it up or do anything weird, and the design itself doesn't actually do that. But it's that overall sort of if you are not compliant, then even if you're just neutral, that's why Will's saying safety stuff is in jeopardy, because then you have to go through this waiver process. It's not going to be allowed. So operational improvements, other sorts of things. So is Victoria still on the call? Someone who's been following this real closely. Just want to check in with you, Victoria. Have I've said anything sort of that's contrary to all of your readings, or are you gone? Maybe she's gone. Never mind.
Looks like she's gone.
Must have been something Will said.
So one other question, you said safety projects. I've never heard him talk about the safety projects before, and we specifically have HSIP funding. I mean, is that now in jeopardy too? Because before they've only said it's been limited to SVG Metro or SVG or CMAC monies.
HSIP funding is from, there's a federal source and then there's a faster piece. So it depends on, I would say, what color the money is that you are awarded.
In our discussions on examples, the only thing we brought up was using SDBG funds for projects that were related to like operational improvements or safety improvements along roadways. And that was specific example. Cdot said, no, those would not be allowed if we have not hit our GHG threshold. But again, it was specific to that funding source. So because we were advocating saying that that's a GHG neutral type project, and GHG neutral wasn't going to comply. It had to be something that reduced GHG.
Safety projects, as a practical matter, I think would be unaffected. And here's why. First off, for the most part, safety projects don't show up into the tip very often. I mean, excuse me, the long range plan, because there's something that's sort of come up. It's not something we plan on doing 30 years from now. And that has a significant funding source. For the most part, we just say safety improvements region-wide, and that's sort of it when it comes to long range plan. The second thing is most safety projects, and again, you correct me because I am certainly not a practitioner, but most safety projects are not quote unquote capacity building, right? You're gonna realign something, or you're gonna move something over, you're gonna change the site distance variables or that sort of thing. So it's not very often from a practical point of view that a safety project is also a capacity project that is quote unquote regionally significant of a mile or more. So from a practical point of view, I don't think that HSIP projects, because of their scope and nature, are going to fall victim for that. That being said, I suppose if there is a big enough HSIP project that's over a mile and in the plan and doesn't pencil out correctly, in theory, they could axe that as well because they have the authority and they've made that very clear. That being said, I think HSIP projects are going to be cool. I could be wrong.
So John, there are some HSIP projects that are combo projects. Like for instance, inside the MANSIP project, we added HSIP money. So that would not be allowed anymore if that type of project didn't help us reduce greenhouse gas then, right?
Yeah, if you're talking about the rural areas, again, I think the rules are slightly different, like Will says.
No, this is inside the MPO area. It's the MANSIP project.
Yeah, you might not, obviously, because it's already under contract, it will be finished no matter what. But yes, you may not see that. You may not see those types of projects in the future. That's correct.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. So we wouldn't be able to do that kind of process if it didn't reduce greenhouse gas.
Right. And again, remember that the folks that really want to move this forward want to reduce the number of roads. That is the goal. So while it might be frustrating at times when I say, well, we're going to do that, I mean, realize that the ultimate goal is the reduction of roads. So if at the end of the day, we all should not be surprised when we hear that, no, that's not going to be allowed, because that was the ultimate goal, is to reduce the number of roads. Let me go through the last couple of slides just on a real quick basis, because it's already 3 o'clock. And then we'll take some finish up kind of questions. Can you hit the next slide, please? All right, so this is just, I stole these last couple of slides from Cdot. And again, we've already sort of hit on this with the questions, which is why I think we can kind of go through this quickly. In the SB 260, they didn't define what a transportation capacity project is or what regionally significant, and they did give a regionally significant one. The definition they give is that of the feds, which is there in writing. That is the same definition that we've been using at PPACG. But basically, we're looking at major attractors, like activity centers, developments, malls, that sort of thing. And the roadways around there, and then any sort of like connectors or major principal arterials. So that's there. Next slide, please. And then again, stole this from Cdot. This is their thing of regionally significant is it has to be a transportation capacity project, plus it has to serve a facility, would normally be included in the modeling. And if that's all three of those conditions are true, it's considered regionally significant for Cdot. Within the MPO boundaries, the MPOs can make up their own definition. But again, we've always used the federal definition, so I don't think we need to come up with a new one. Next slide, please. This is that transportation capacity project. And again, this is what CDOT's using. And we'll probably use it as well, but we're not required to. Increases minimum throughput, improves travel time reliability, meets the appropriate length threshold, which I think is a mile. Do you remember well? Oh, thank you. Danelle remembers, it's mile. So if those two things are there, it's considered a capacity improving project. Next slide, please. And then this is, now we're getting into the mitigation. So there's only a few more slides left. These are the things that CDOT did mitigation on. So bicycle and pedestrian, transit, electrification, TDM strategies, operations, parking management. And again, the idea is if we remove parking, then people won't drive. So that's the connection.
So what's the
And
definition of unbundle? Is that mean not offer? In a very cute
right.
way?
That I think in this, and Will, you might need to help me because I'll screw it up. But basically, right now, if you rent an apartment complex, you get your apartment and you get a parking space. They want to unbundle that. So where you would be disincentivized from owning a car. They want it to be where you would rent an apartment. And then if you wanted to rent the parking space, that would be extra.
What they're looking for in the example they gave us was an elimination of minimum parking requirements for residential development. So if the zone allows, say, multifamily residential development, to make sure that there's no minimum parking requirements for that development. In other words, it can be developed without any parking.
So I would suggest the exact opposite. Let them have it at their houses and fight for it when they get to the shopping centers, because there's way more asphalt parking lots that are taking up space and making it hot than there are necessarily grass and tree-lined streets in residential areas. But that's my opinion.
I will be voting for you when you run for the state legislature. Next slide, please. Then the next three slides are just some examples. And again, because we've eaten up a lot of time, this is exactly for what they're doing for the bike lane. So for example, if you do a bike lane for one plan year, you can get 23 metric ton points through 2024. If you do it in your 2025 plan, you can get 19 points. So basically, again, we need 0.12 million. So it's, you can do the math. It's, you got to divide that in. So you need quite a bit of bike lanes to get close to the mitigation, which is, again, bike lanes a lot of times can be put in the model. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. This is their thing on complete streets and reduction of transit fares. Again, this is just an example. And just go to the last slide. I'm pretty sure this is the last one. This is how they do for parking management. That again, if you eliminate some parking, these are the sort of points that you get. So I think that's it. Is there no more slides? Yeah, that's it. So with that, yeah, and I do want to thank you all for hanging in, number one, and number two being the guinea pigs, because we're going to take this to CAC and we're going to take it to the board. I think I definitely need to sort of pare it down some, but at the end of the day, I think the questions you guys have asked are very similar to the sort of questions I'm going to get from the board. So I'll just tell Andy, it's going to be a really long presentation, and not so much my presentation, because it's really only a few minutes, but I think it's the questions that this engenders. So with that being said, any additional questions or critiques or comments?
So I have the same question that I'll probably ask until I actually get to see it, but how's the math working? Since in my opinion, it's still voodoo magic and I can stay that on a record and probably keep my job, but I
But
don't,
we can't.
I
so
don't,
just
it
be
doesn't
careful.
feel like it's gotten to the point that there's enough information and it's been kind of all put together in such a way that it's working out. I mean, I'm happy that Dr. Cog is going through the math and everybody else is before we are, but it just seems like such a nebulous operation that it's hard to make it from theoretical to concrete, and people in cars on their roads in our cities that we're trying to keep economically viable are real.
Yeah. So there is lots of documentation that CDOT has provided. There is a lot of studies that they are referencing. I will say that not all of us agree with all of the conclusions of the things that are being cited, right? So, back when you were in school, right, if you wanted to have a paper and you wanted to be pro something because you knew the teacher was, you kind of found those sources. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I don't think that there's a realistic cross-section of the research. They're finding things that prove their point, and that is being bundled. So if you look at the, like that spread, the last 3 slides, there's like 45 pages of notes and technical errata. So they're quote unquote proving all of the numbers. I think when we move from the academic world to the real world, that's where a lot of us have raised issues. But when a real world person talks to an academic person, they just say, well, I've got all the research and I show you what it is. So in their mind, they believe that they have proved their point, and that if we stop building roads, people will stop driving and we will all start breathing much easier. And since that's the road we're going down, I certainly hope they're right.
I think people will start moving. They won't stop driving. They will
Well,
just get fed
if-
up and find a new place to live.
And if they move, that's good too, because then they can't vote against the people who are doing these things. So that's another positive for these folks. They want that. They want you to move. So anyhow,
Okay, thank you. Lots more to come on that, I think. Okay, back to the agenda. Any member entity announcements that they haven't had a chance to share yet? Items for future, go ahead, Gail.
I'll just mention 2 quick items. One, the airport road bridge over Spring Creek is nearing completion. There's going to be a groundbreaking on June 9th at 2 p.m. if you're interested in participating. And the city will be applying for a mega and infogrant award application between now and Monday. We've got that pulled together, and that's for the UPR bridges over Nevada, Tejon, and then Shooks Run. And then also looking for a bridge replacement on Las Vegas Street over Shooks Run, so we can complete the legacy loop. As long as I get credit for it for greenhouse gas mitigation.
yeah, unfortunately you did it before. So no, you can only get for things that you do in the future. No,
Future guests.
again, we'll see what the rules say. Sorry. Too soon to make jokes? Too soon.
No, I did read that, but I'm taking that.
Carbon credits. Okay, any other member announcements? Okay, without anything else, let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. Have a good day.